Hey folks, welcome back to Game Garbage, where we take a look at games, chat about the gaming news in the industry, and of course, stream for fun. Today we're talking about the Switch 2. This will be a little bit of an update on some of the numbers, but then too, also kind of a broad look at Switch 2 as a whole. And the thing that I think is interesting is I think Nintendo focused on the wrong stuff while also increasing the prices, whether they had to or not, which I believe they did have to, because we can see with their profit margin, it's roughly down about 30% from where it's normally at. And this could just continue into a multi-year launch that maybe has some good sales until the next gen stuff comes out. That's what normally happens. But hey, I am curious what you guys think. You may not always agree with me, and hey, that's perfectly okay. I enjoy the discussion. So go ahead and leave comments down below. But yeah, we'll first start with the actual total sales. First, we're looking at roughly 17 million. We know from Nintendo report that came out in March, or into February. Anyway, their latest earnings that they basically have sold over 17 million consoles. We know that, and they are having a much better trajectory with the Switch One. I'll show that here in a little bit, but yeah, they've been doing very, very well, and it is uh, on a much higher pace than what the Switch One was. We'll go ahead and pull up the other chart here. And yeah, the Switch One is their best-selling Nintendo console at 155 million total sold so far. I think it's still a few are actually selling, but yeah, it's kind of insane how well the Switch One sold. But I think a lot of it comes down to the price, and then too a lot of good games. What we're seeing with the Switch 2 is that we know that again it's roughly about 17 million after 8 months, which would put it about right here where my cursor is. So it's definitely several million above. Well, it's more than double actually above what we would expect with the 8 month. But I just don't know if it can keep this trajectory because we had a kind of a steady pace and then it kicked up again during COVID and stimulus money, and a lot of people actually bought some. And then again, too, it was a $300 console compared to the five or now 550 with some of the price changes that we've had with previous consoles, and even just more expensive hardware for PCs. So yeah, it did very, very, very good, and it will continue to do so. But I do think they will plateau sooner. And I think for people, they will pick up a Switch 2 as a secondary option, as kind of Nintendo consoles have been. And there's a lot of younger generations now that are focusing on PC sooner or focusing even on the other consoles first. And when we take a look at the Switch 2, there's just not as much there or hype as what we would initially think. And yeah, it's just very interesting. But yeah, the Switch 2 was definitely an upgrade, not revolutionary. That was one thing that's definitely holding it back. The Switch 2 would also depend on its features, pricing, and the games. We would ultimately learn over time that Nintendo, in my opinion, took a wrong turn. This doesn't mean that the Switch 2 will fail. I just think it will underperform as it already is. When we got to hear some of the data out of last holiday in 2025, we found out that, yeah, they sold less than they were expecting. We also know, too, that by March of this month, they were expecting to sell 25 million consoles, and they've maybe sold 18, 19 million. So they're short several million. They're probably going to work on cutting back some of that production, which I think is a good thing because all hardware is getting more expensive, whether it's for your hard drives, whether it's for your RAM or your GPU or whatever else, or your SoCs. It's just getting more expensive to actually build hardware, and there's really no way around that. I still think we're ultimately going to have a price increase up to probably around the $500 mark USD, and that's just not going to make the circumstances any better. I think they're holding off as long as they can, but I ultimately think eventually they're probably going to do that. My guess would be for the holiday of 2026, or maybe on the 1 year anniversary, actually make it $500 on top of all of the other prices that they've had, unfortunately, go up. But I do think that Nintendo is kind of changing in the minds of players, and while some have already been there, I think a big majority have actually shifted for that. And I think, too, a lot of players, when they're thinking about what they want to play on, accessibility is becoming king, more optionality, more competition for the hardware space instead of being locked into a walled garden or whatever. And yeah, there's just more accessibility, far reaching outside of hardware now, whether it's on the PC, whether it's on the console side, or even like your web browser and mobile and stuff. It's just kind of going everywhere. And the business model of exclusivity and walled gardens is showing definite weakness. And so let's go over some of the changes in the minds of players. Well, definitely the price. Um, and yeah, as I said, I expected to go higher. But yeah, the first console, as we know, was 450, and this already was too high for some. Myself included. I was been waiting to see what will come out, what will be exciting, if the games will maybe be really good, because I have children myself. But then taking a look at what's happened so far in the first 8 months, it's like I'm just not that overly excited personally. So yeah, I'm just going to be skipping it. Also, too, the next we were learning about the price of Mario Kart World. Well, the first $80 game. Most of us probably remember that. Also, too, if you wanted physical, that was a $90, not 80. Found out too that basically every single game, first and third party, for the Switch 2 was also now going to be $70. And it's just like, man, and why the price increase? Well, now we have the 4K, we have the HDR. It takes longer to actually make and manufacture these games, and that's one of the disadvantages with having higher graphics in video games, whatever aspect you're implementing, because yeah, it just takes longer to actually make them, so the costs go up. And then now, of course, all of the hardware you're building them on also has gone up in price because of tariffs, because of the AI push for data centers, and all of this other kind of stuff. There was also, unfortunately, with Mario Kart World, which is the launch title, a patch that came out pretty quickly to add some quality of life improvements and also showed that the game wasn't ready. We also got to see this with Pokemon Legends ZA, and we also got to see this with some other games too that we just did not necessarily expect. And we kind of expected something to be better, to kind of be getting more for the bang for our buck. But again, it just doesn't really seem to compare to some of us for what the other consoles or even PC is offering. It's like, so I got to spend more money for some graphical upgrades that I can't necessarily see or tell if you have the right TV setup or even if you're doing your handheld. And again, 120 frames per second or refresh rate is nice, but again, that's not necessarily a guarantee. We found out too again with Pokemon Legends ZA. Again, just did not feel like it was worth the price tag. And then there was also some DLC announced before the game was even released, which we'll go over. It only got a 64 on Metacritic. That was the Mega Evolution DLC for $30, and the other one was for 10. But if you got the quote expansion pass, you could get them for 35, saving you $5, and that ultimately made the entire game in its entirety $110. Talk about an expensive Switch 2 game. So yeah, they're definitely just going for your pocket, which is ridiculous. We also had DK Bonanza, which was high praised. The DLC, unfortunately, was not, which was $20, and it was more of a roguelike mode, and most people got bored with it actually pretty quickly. It wasn't long after launch that the tariffs got in the way, and pretty much every single accessory went up for the Switch 2, which now controllers are now 105 or like $110. We also got to see the graphics again up to 120 frames per second, 4K resolution, and HDR, but none of these were really possible without the Switch 2 upscaler from NVIDIA. So again, your hardware wasn't necessarily doing the work; it was the upscaler. And then also too, because of all of these graphical improvements, you now also need an SSD instead of a hard drive for the faster read rate, and that also makes the price go up. The hardware itself didn't necessarily compete with the Series S, which it still doesn't, and the upscaler is also required to run current console games. When we start getting into the next gen games, again, we're going to run into some of the same problems that we had with the S1 or the Switch 1, where just stuff had to be scaled back so badly, so much just to get it to run. It just looks horrible. And Mortal Kombat was one of those examples. And I'm sure we'll see that again as soon as the next gen games start coming out and things start being pushed that direction. Also, the LCD screen was worse on the Switch 2 than on the Switch 1. And yeah, that really didn't look that great, unfortunately. And then we had the games. And again, they're okay to good, but like really nothing amazing in most cases. We also had the key cards, but we'll get into that in just a second. So let's take a look at the actual games here. And again, the ones that were good were either third party for the most part, or just remasters, right? There were upgrades. We had Hades 2, Donkey Kong Bonanza. That was the best one really made for like the Switch 2, which was great. And then Pokopia has gotten really high reviews. But again, that's not really like a demanding game. But a lot of people do like it. This is sold, I think, roughly around 2.5 million. Donkey Kong Bonanza, sold, I want to say 3 or 4 million, which was pretty good. But yeah, we look at the rest of the games, and it's not really Nintendo games. And I feel like, too, Nintendo really had kind of a weak launch for their actual games. And now that these games take longer to make, well, they're pushing more of the third party stuff. They're wanting to take whatever current gen titles are on PlayStation and Xbox and, well, bring them over to the Switch too, because technically it can play it now, right? And yeah, they do run pretty good. The upscaler does good work. But again, the upscaler is really required. And that is just a beef that I have going forward, is that regardless of where or what you're playing on, you have to have the upscaler now. And I'm not super excited about that. Also had Bomber Boy, but as you can see, a lot of these games are really in the 80s that they've had so far. Kirby Air Riders, Kirby Forgotten Kingdom was a 83. We also had the Disney Collection for $80, Kirby Air Riders at 79, Metroid Prime 4, which 18 years in the making, was a 78. Not good, in my opinion. And then even Pokemon Legends ZA was also a 78. Fever was 77. And again, these aren't necessarily bad scores, but you would want really good games coming out for the actual launch of your console. Because if we're going to be honest, Nintendo has a window of roughly 2 years before the other console generations come out. And when that happens, well, that's when people are going to spend their money. And if people are working so hard to just have the money that they have, and they have to pay more for groceries, gas, and insurance, and everything else, and rent, etc., well, they're going to cut back. And they're not necessarily going to stop their hobby, but they're going to stop spending how much that they're actually spending, or overall buy less units in games, and etc. So the people that usually buy 2 or 3 platforms, that's going to be cutting back. And more people are just going to buy one, or just save up and just buy one. And so, yeah, that's going to, I think, cut into some of the sales with the Switch too. And I think we're already seeing that, which is kind of crazy. We also had Xenoblade X, which was, oh man, 76. I was hoping that was going to be better. But yeah, that would be honestly cool to have. That was a good try of one. But as we're seeing too, a lot of these are just ultimately third-party stuff. Drag X Drive was just to kind of showcase the mouse controls, which no one even talks about now. That was 60. And then Nintendo Switch Welcome Tour was 54, which is their lowest game. And yeah, in my opinion, this still should have been free. The Wii Sports wasn't supposed to be free, but they did do that well. But they set precedent, even though that was, over a decade ago. But still, they should have made it free, because yeah, charging $10 is kind of ridiculous. So while we take a look at a lot of these games, again, the majority of them are either older titles. And there was one really good one, but the rest of them just didn't hit like people thought. And I wonder if anyone really plays Mario Kart World anymore, which is kind of nuts. Roughly within 3 months, the game was just basically dead. And it was being populated with bots. People were talking about that. Even people were talking about that within 2 months, 8 weeks. They were seeing that issue and the problem with their lobbies. So yeah, I feel like their game release could have been a heck of a lot better. Because the games that people have been excited for, while they do run, well, you're not going to play them on the worst platform. Let's be real. You're going to play them somewhere else, right? You're going to be playing them on PC or PlayStation or Xbox or something. You're not going to be playing them on something else. And then if you want a mobile, or handheld, the Steam Deck is still a good choice. We also still have the Steam Machine coming, and then possibly even the Steam Deck 2 coming in a few years. We'll see when that happens. But yeah, this is just not the type of release some of us were expecting. Also, the issue with key cards, well, they only allowed 64 gigs for a physical cartridge card at launch, which really cut into the profits for these third-party games. So a lot of them were just, the key card was, it had just enough on the physical cartridge for you to connect to the internet and basically then hook up to the servers and download your game, meaning the game files were not on the cartridge, which in my opinion was a big no-no, because they were the last ones to really push every game having the files on the cartridge. And 64 sounds good, but again, not even all games had that. Like Yakuza and Split Fiction, I think were both around 80 or like 90 gigs, which is crazy for file size. And so, yeah, that doesn't fit on a 64. So, yeah, it just has to be a key card. And people were not overly excited about that. The thing, too, is like we also got to see, I believe, Pokopia with that as well, even though it's a first party like Pokemon game. It's a offshoot of a Pokemon game, right? But still it's a Pokemon game. And yeah, that just doesn't necessarily bode very well. The other thing too is that we're seeing that the uh all retail and special editions will basically be a $10 increase in euros for a full physical cartridge, which I think is frustrating. And then it's because of the higher production costs. So yeah, people are just not overly excited for that. And then the thing too is that we're looking at now that cartridges, rumored anyway, cartridges are now going to be coming out in 16 and 32, but they should have done that at the beginning. Because if your game is only 8 gigs, you're not going to want to buy a 64 gigabyte cartridge and pay that extra cost. This should have been available. And so, what did third party do? Well, basically, everybody was like, well, we're just going to do the key card because it's a heck of a lot cheaper. And I really think Nintendo shot themselves in the foot doing that. The other thing too, with all of the bans and what was possible, and yeah, Nintendo really buckled down on what you could do. They weren't going to allow the Meg Switch anymore, and there were other things, and even certain people with certain names, like Twinkie Links, got their console banned. And no, we're talking perma banned console. No longer able to hook up to the internet. You're no longer. All of your key cards are now basically garbage if you ever delete those files again because you can't access the servers to actually download those games. And it really kind of becomes a mess. So it still technically works, but not being able to have internet access, well, you just lose a ton of functionality and it basically becomes a brick. And there's no way to reverse it. So then it screws the used market for getting a Switch 2, which is basically why it doesn't exist. And yeah, with all of this stuff culminated, I really feel like Nintendo just went the wrong way ultimately on their games, and they've still sold a lot of consoles, but I don't think they still might hit over 50 million consoles sold, but I don't think they're going to hit over 50 million. Even though the Switch 1 sold 155, I don't think they're going to hit 50 over the entire life cycle of the Switch because of the Switch 2. Because if they keep increasing the prices because of tariffs or because of the war, the cost of whatever, or just the hardware shortage because of AI stuff, there's a lot of things that are going to be pushing all of their hardware getting more expensive along with everyone else. But Nintendo consoles haven't really been a mainstay anyway for a lot of players. It's really been PC or one of the other consoles. So some people are just skipping this because they don't really see the reason. And when their best games are remasters, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And they sold plenty of copies. But I mean, your big ones are supposed to be your bangers that are really made for Switch 2. Your exclusives, that's supposed to be bringing people over to your console and getting them to buy one, but not at $450 with $80 games or $70 games with DLCs that are, $20, $30. It just kind of starts getting ridiculous. And it starts becoming too much. And then at least all of the first party stuff, besides Pokopia, which I think it'll eventually shift that way anyway, but all of the first party stuff, all of the files are actually on the cartridge. But pretty much almost none of the third party stuff, except for I think Satisfactory and Cyberpunk. Or Factorial, whichever one that was. There was a few games. But the majority, yeah, I just think the whole thing is just bent the wrong way. And when you think of all of this, generally speaking, the Switch 2 is not your first option. It's not what you think about. It's not what you get excited about. I mean, we're still going to hear about Switch, but I mean, Nintendo has had a couple of showcases already, and nobody really talks about them. I don't think anybody really cares. There's no excitement around it anymore. It's over. And we're less than a year in, and people are just kind of meh. Just kind of done. Again, it's had a really good launch. I'm not denying that at all, but I think it's going to be tough getting it to 50 million because of cost, because of the lack of first party banger games, and I also think because everything else also costs too much and the prices are still likely to go up. That sucks. The key card situation doesn't help either, and then the restrictiveness that Nintendo has on the Switch too. Basically being able to ban you for anything. Their EULA agreement is disgusting. You're more renting it than actually buying it. And that's awful. People don't want that. So what do you guys think? Do you think the Switch 2 will continue to sell? Do you think it'll sell over 50 million? Is there a game that you're excited for? I think Dusk Bloods is actually coming out pretty soon, later this year. And but I do think that will just be an exclusive to the Switch 2. But I think the mentality around a lot of younger players is that they're not interested in buying hardware just for a few games. We've already kind of talking about that with PlayStation, um, possibly pulling PC ports. We haven't gotten confirmation from actual Sony yet, but we'll have to see. But yeah, I think personally the exclusivity train is done, and I think consoles have to switch, and this is why we're seeing the complete change with Xbox, being able to play anywhere, having services, having their games everywhere, getting away from exclusivity, and the console no longer being the focus. Now that's a change with Officer Sharma, but that can be a whole nother video. But I think Xbox, with basically being last place and needing to make some changes, well, they're basically showing where everyone else is going to go because Xbox had to change first. That's it. I don't think there's anything else more special than that. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, guys. You can always follow me at GameGarbage22 over at YouTube. Various content every single week. If something's not for you, don't worry about it. Just move right on through to the next thing. There will be something new. Also, too, you can follow me at Twitch at Don't Tread on D if you'd like. And yeah, when I do actually play video games, things have been very busy lately. You can watch me there. And yeah, Crimson Desert is going to be coming out on the 19th. I will be streaming it that day. I'm not sure exactly when. I got to get a feel for what's happening. But yeah, I will be streaming it roughly pretty much every day for a week, 6 or 7 days. And I'm very excited for that. But I'm going to be doing it on the Xbox. We're going to be taking a look at the performance, the game. When I have some time to do it, I'll do my initial look. And anyway, yeah, I hope to see you there. And if not, that's okay too. With that, folks, I'll see you guys on the next one.